Imagine coming home after a long day, expecting comfort in the familiar stillness of your house. But instead, you walk into silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses down on your chest like a storm waiting to break. I've always believed that the hardest truths reveal themselves in moments like this. It's never the loud arguments or slammed doors, it's the quiet moments when life changes forever. And that night, everything changed. What I thought was a story about love and trust, turned into something far darker. A story of betrayal, lies, and danger. A story that I never saw coming, until it was too late. The November wind whistled through the cracks of the old colonial house I'd called home for nearly 20 years. Outside, the oak trees stood bare, their twisted branches clawing at the evening sky. Inside, the air carried the scent of old wood, worn leather, and something faintly metallic. I set my briefcase down carefully in the hall, taking a moment to appreciate the stillness. After years of hustle, the quiet was what I craved most these days. My consulting job, retirement in everything but name, allowed me more time at home. Time I planned to spend with my wife, Caroline, and our grown children when they visited. But something was off tonight. It wasn't the absence of the usual chaos, the sound of Caroline cooking, the gentle murmur of music playing from her study. No, it was the heavy quiet that pressed down like a storm on the horizon. I walked toward the living room, my footsteps softened by the worn rug that Caroline had insisted on keeping despite its age. At the mantel, I paused, running a hand over the family photos. There we were, the four of us smiling at the beach, celebrating milestones, frozen in time. I turned, expecting to hear Caroline's voice greeting me from another room. Nothing. I climbed the stairs, my mind drifting to the dinner I planned to suggest. We'd been distant lately, both of us caught in our routines, lost in our heads. A dinner out might help bridge that gap. As I reached the bedroom door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. Odd. Caroline never left doors open like that. I nudged it open with a light push, and there she was, sitting at the edge of our bed, her phone pressed to her ear. The robe I'd bought her for her birthday slipped off one shoulder, revealing the curve of her neck. She was laughing. I froze in place. The laugh wasn't one I recognized. It wasn't the kind she shared with me after a long day, or even the polite chuckle she reserved for acquaintances. This was different. Intimate. Playful. Of course, she murmured into the phone, her voice soft and sweet. I can't wait. The words were a dagger, slicing through the fabric of familiarity. I stepped back, but the floor betrayed me with a creak. Caroline's head whipped toward the door, her eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, everything froze, the laughter, the warmth, the pretense. James, she whispered, her voice tinged with both guilt and fear. I'm home, I said quietly, stepping fully into the room. Caroline's hand trembled as she lowered the phone to her lap. Her cheeks flushed, and for a moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with, the same nervous tilt of her head, the same wide-eyed innocence she wore when she thought she was caught doing something wrong. But this wasn't about sneaking extra cookies from the jar or lying about a shopping spree. This was something far worse. Who were you talking to? My voice came out steadier than I expected, calm like the eye of a storm. She swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a thin line. No one. Just a friend. Is that what we're calling it now? I took another step into the room, leaning against the doorframe. Friends usually make plans to meet up, in secret. Her face twisted, the guilt quickly replaced by a flash of irritation. Don't start jumping to conclusions, James. I raised an eyebrow. Then explain. Who is he? Her gaze darted to the phone on her lap. She clutched it tighter, as if it might shield her from the conversation she could no longer avoid. It's nothing serious, she said after a moment, her voice quiet. Nothing serious, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. I ran my fingers through my hair, pacing the room to keep my hands busy, to stop the thoughts racing in my head from spilling out in anger. My mind replayed the last few months, moments that suddenly took on new meaning. The late nights at her book club, the mysterious texts she dismissed with a casual wave, the growing distance between us that I blamed on the natural rhythms of marriage. It hadn't been the rhythm of time pulling us apart. It had been someone else. I stopped pacing and faced her. How long? Her eyes darted down to the floor. James, please. How long? My voice sharpened, cutting through her excuses. Caroline looked up, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. But then her expression hardened. It doesn't matter. It's over. The audacity of that statement nearly knocked the wind out of me. I let out a bitter laugh. Over? That's convenient. For you. She stood, pulling her robe tighter around her shoulders, her movements agitated. I made a mistake, James. That's all it was. It didn't mean anything. Can we please not turn this into something it's not? My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of her words pressing down on me. A mistake. That's what she called it. As if it was a lapse in judgment, a momentary slip that meant nothing. But I knew better. I'd seen that look on her face, the way her eyes lit up during the phone call, the laughter that hadn't been for me in a long time. Did you love him? I asked, the words catching in my throat. She flinched. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. I see. I turned away from her, staring out the window. The night stretched out before me, cold and indifferent. James, please. Her voice was softer now, almost pleading. I never wanted to hurt you. I was lonely. We've been drifting apart for years, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I clenched my fists. So, instead of talking to me, you reached out to someone else. She took a step closer, her hand hovering in the air as if she wanted to touch me but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. I'm sorry. The apology hung between us, hollow and inadequate. Who is he? I asked again, my voice cold and steady. I deserve to know. Caroline's shoulders sagged. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then she whispered, his name is Daniel. I closed my eyes, letting the name settle in my mind. Daniel. I recognized it. The man I'd seen at one of her charity events a few months back, the one who lingered too long in conversation, whose hand brushed hers in a way that made my stomach twist. The signs had been there all along. I'd just chosen not to see them. Does he know you're ending it? Her silence was answer enough. I nodded slowly, my chest tight with the weight of realization. I'll be staying in the guest room tonight. James, wait. But I didn't wait. I walked out of the bedroom, closing the door behind me. As I stood in the hallway, my mind raced. The foundation of our life together was cracking, and the truth had only begun to reveal itself. There was more to uncover. I could feel it. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the rest. The guest room smelled faintly of cedarwood and dust. It was a room rarely used, meant for out-of-town visitors who never stayed long. Now, it felt like a liminal space, somewhere between familiarity and exile. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind replaying every interaction with Caroline over the past year. Her soft apologies when she came home late. The way she angled her phone away from me, claiming it was work. The sudden care she took with her appearance before heading out for what I assumed were routine errands. I had been blind. The clock on the nightstand read 1:12 a.m., but sleep was out of the question. Instead, I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across the room. I typed his name into the search bar. Daniel W. Spencer. The search returned dozens of results. It was a common enough name, but I knew I'd recognize him when I saw him. I scrolled through profiles on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, my patience thinning as the hours dragged on. And then I found him. A professional headshot stared back at me from his consulting firm's website. Clean-shaven, early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a confident smile that made my stomach churn. His bio painted him as a respected business consultant with ties to charitable organizations across the Pacific Northwest, including several that Caroline had chaired. I clicked on a gallery of photos from a gala last spring. There she was, Caroline in a sleek black gown, standing next to him. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, a gesture I wouldn't have thought twice about then. Now, it screamed intimacy. Scrolling further, I found a picture of them laughing together, their faces close. Her expression was radiant, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. I sat back, the laptop heating my legs as I processed what I was seeing. This wasn't just a fling. There was history here. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion creeping in. I could confront her now, demand more answers, but something held me back. Caroline had already shown me she was capable of deception. If I wanted the full truth, I'd have to dig deeper. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Aiden, my oldest friend. Aiden, still awake. Without thinking, I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Hey. You okay? I let out a bitter laugh. No. Not really. There was a long pause before he spoke again. You want to talk about it? I told him everything, the phone call, the confession, the name. The words tumbled out in a way that felt both cathartic and damning. Aiden listened quietly, letting me vent without interruption. When I finally stopped, he sighed. Damn, man. I don't even know what to say. Me neither, I admitted. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It feels like, everything's unraveling. You're sure it's him? Yeah. I found pictures. Aiden's tone hardened. You need to be careful. Guys like that don't just walk away. They worm their way into your life, take what they want, and leave the mess for someone else to clean up. I stared at the photo on my screen, the smile on Daniel's face taunting me. What are you going to do? Aiden asked. I'm not sure yet, I said, my voice low. But I'm going to get the truth. All of it. Good, Aiden said firmly. And whatever you need, I've got your back. We hung up, but I didn't move from my spot on the bed. The weight of what I had discovered settled heavily on my chest. I clicked back to Daniel's profile, taking in every detail. His face, his career, his connections. And then something caught my eye, a mention of an upcoming business retreat. November 15th to 18th. Breckenridge Lodge. My blood ran cold. That was next weekend. And Caroline had mentioned she'd be out of town for a work trip. The pieces were falling into place. And I was done being in the dark. If she thought she could keep secrets, she was wrong. I was going to follow her. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, I had a plan. I moved quietly through the house, packing a small bag. Caroline was still asleep, or pretending to be. Her side of the bed remained undisturbed when I glanced into the bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, wondering if I'd missed a sign, a moment when I could have stopped this before it spiraled out of control. But the woman lying there wasn't the one I thought I knew. She had her secrets. And I was about to uncover them. Breckenridge Lodge sat nestled in the hills, an exclusive retreat for high-end clients looking to mix business with luxury. I'd driven there once with Caroline, years ago, for an anniversary getaway. Now, the thought of her returning there with someone else twisted my stomach. I parked a short distance from the lodge entrance, far enough to avoid recognition but close enough to watch the flow of arrivals. The lodge was stunning, its rustic stone and timber exterior framed by towering evergreens. I spotted Daniel almost immediately. He stepped out of a sleek black car, wearing a tailored coat that exuded wealth and confidence. A woman greeted him at the entrance, a hotel staff member, judging by her uniform, but there was no sign of Caroline yet. I shifted in my seat, my heart pounding. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, a familiar car pulled up. Caroline. She stepped out, dressed in business casual, blazer, scarf, heels, but there was a subtle elegance to her that I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked radiant. I watched as Daniel approached her. He placed a hand on her back, guiding her toward the entrance. She tilted her head up to him, laughing at something he said, the sound of her joy carried on the wind. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. I should have left right then and there, but something held me in place. I wasn't just looking for proof of the affair. I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos from the car, evidence, though I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet. As they disappeared inside the lodge, I debated my next move. I could confront them now, barge in and demand the truth. But instinct told me to wait. Patience wasn't my strong suit, but if I wanted the full picture, I had to play this carefully. Hours later, I was still parked outside the lodge, watching from the shadows as the sun dipped low in the sky. I'd seen Caroline and Daniel several times throughout the day, always together, always smiling. They moved easily in each other's presence, like they'd done this 100 times before. But then, just before dusk, something changed. Daniel left the lodge alone, heading toward a trail that led into the nearby woods. Curiosity tugged at me. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and followed. The trail was narrow, winding through towering trees that cast long shadows across the forest floor. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but I pressed on. Daniel walked with purpose, unaware he was being followed. Finally, he stopped at a clearing, pulling out his phone. I crept closer, keeping to the shadows, straining to hear his conversation. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "It's all set. She has no idea." I froze. Was he talking about Caroline? The words that followed sent a chill down my spine. By the time she finds out, it'll be too late. My pulse quickened. What the hell was he planning? I crouched lower, hidden behind a tree, as Daniel continued his call. "Just make sure everything's in place on your end. We can't afford any mistakes." He ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket before heading back toward the lodge. I stayed frozen in place, my mind racing. This wasn't just an affair. There was something more, something far more sinister. And I had just stumbled into the middle of it. I didn't move for a long time after Daniel left the clearing. The cold air seeped through my coat, but I barely noticed it. His words kept echoing in my mind. She has no idea. By the time she finds out, it'll be too late. The hell does that mean? I retraced my steps back to my car, my boots crunching on the gravel path. My mind raced, cycling through every possibility. Was it about Caroline? Or was there another woman, another secret, woven into Daniel's web? The uncertainty gnawed at me. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an affair. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken of them at the lodge. One image stuck out, Daniel's hand resting on Caroline's lower back as they entered the building. There was something possessive about the gesture, something that made my stomach churn. I needed more information. Settling into the driver's seat, I pulled out my laptop and opened the private investigator app I downloaded after talking to Aiden. It wasn't exactly legal, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I typed in Daniel's name and hit search. The results were sparse at first. His consulting firm, a few charity events, and the same photos I'd already seen. But then something caught my attention, a recent business deal listed under a shell company. Redwood Capital Ventures. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The company had ties to several real estate developments, and 2 of them were in foreclosure. The numbers didn't add up. Millions of dollars were missing from the projects, the kind of money that doesn't just disappear without someone noticing. I leaned back in my seat, rubbing my temples. Daniel wasn't just charming Caroline. He was running a scam. But was she in on it? I pulled up my banking app, my heart pounding as I scrolled through our joint accounts. I hadn't paid much attention to our finances recently. My consulting work brought in more than enough to keep us comfortable, and I trusted Caroline to handle the household budget. Big mistake. There it was, a series of withdrawals, each one carefully spaced out over the past year. Tens of thousands of dollars, funneled into an account I didn't recognize. I clicked on the account details. The account was in her name. A lump formed in my throat as I stared at the screen. She was helping him. Or at the very least, she was hiding money from me. I clenched my fists, the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. I'd come here expecting to find proof of an affair, but this was something bigger. Something calculated. Night had fallen by the time I spotted Caroline again. She was standing on the balcony outside her room, phone pressed to her ear. The wind tugged at her scarf, and I could see her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. I grabbed my camera and zoomed in, snapping a few more photos. Her lips moved, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, out of nowhere, her shoulders sagged. She lowered the phone and gripped the balcony railing with both hands, her head bowed as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. For a moment, I saw the woman I once knew, the woman who used to laugh with me over late-night wine and share quiet moments by the fireplace. But that woman was gone. Replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The next morning, I decided to make my move. I walked into the lodge's lobby, keeping my head down as I passed the front desk. The receptionist barely glanced up, too busy checking in another guest. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heading toward the room I knew was hers. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a moment before knocking. The door opened a crack, and Caroline's face appeared. Her eyes widened in shock. "James? Surprised to see me?" I asked, my voice cold. Her hand trembled on the doorknob. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing." I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was spacious, with a fireplace crackling in the corner and a bottle of wine sitting on the coffee table. 2 glasses. She closed the door behind me, her back pressed against it as if she needed the support. "How did you find me? Does it matter?" I crossed my arms, staring her down. "I know about Daniel. I know about the money. And I know about the retreat this weekend. So, why don't you start talking?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I took a step closer. "What's going on, Caroline? And don't you dare lie to me." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she blinked them away. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. I'm in over my head." And then she said something that made my blood run cold. "He's dangerous, James." I stepped back, my heart pounding. "What?" Caroline's gaze darted to the window, as if expecting to see someone there. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Daniel. He's not who you think he is." I stared at her, the puzzle pieces beginning to fall into place. "Then tell me," I said. "Who is he?" Caroline swallowed hard. "He's the man who's going to ruin everything." Caroline sank onto the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. The tension in the room was suffocating. I stood by the window, watching her carefully, waiting for her to speak. Her words hung in the air like smoke. "He's dangerous, James." I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but something about the way she looked, broken, afraid, made me pause. This wasn't just about infidelity. There was something deeper at play, something I couldn't see yet. "I need you to start at the beginning," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Who is he, Caroline? And why the hell is he targeting you?" Her shoulders trembled as she took a shaky breath. "He's not targeting me, James." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked up, her eyes full of tears. "He's targeting you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Me?" I shook my head. "I've never met the man before." Caroline let out a bitter laugh. "That's the thing, James. You have. You just didn't realize it." I stared at her, my mind racing. "When?" She rubbed her temples, as if trying to summon the memory from a place she'd buried long ago. "It was 6 years ago. You were consulting for that startup in Seattle, Rainier Capital. They were trying to break into the fintech space, but they were in trouble." I nodded slowly. I remembered the project. It had been a mess of shady accounting practices and mismanaged funds. I'd advised the board to pull the plug before things got worse. But I still didn't see the connection. "I remember Rainier Capital," I said. "But what does that have to do with Daniel?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Because he was part of it." I froze. "What?" "He was one of the investors," Caroline said quietly. "He'd put a lot of money into the company, and when it failed, he lost everything." I racked my brain, trying to recall his name in the list of stakeholders. But nothing came to mind. "I don't remember him." "Of course you don't," Caroline snapped. You never paid attention to the people who got hurt by your decisions. You just wrote your reports and moved on. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. So you're saying I was doing my job? She sighed. Yes. But it wasn't just about the money for him. He took it personally. I crossed my arms. That doesn't explain why you got involved with him. Caroline looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. He came to me after Rainier collapsed. He wanted information about you. He wanted revenge. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. And you gave it to him? She shook her head. No. Not at first. I told him I wouldn't help him. But he didn't give up. And then? Her shoulders slumped. He kept showing up. He'd find me at charity events, at coffee shops. He was charming, persuasive. At first, I thought he just wanted closure. But then. She trailed off, her voice cracking. But then what? Caroline buried her face in her hands. Then he threatened me. I felt my blood run cold. Threatened you how? She looked up, her eyes haunted. He said if I didn't help him get close to you, he'd ruin our family. He'd destroy your reputation, make sure you lost everything. The room spun as the pieces began to fall into place. Daniel wasn't just some jealous lover. He wasn't just after Caroline. He was after me. But something still didn't add up. If he wanted to destroy me, why the hell did you start sleeping with him? I asked, my voice harsh. Caroline flinched. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I thought if I kept him close, I could control the situation. I thought I could protect you. Protect me? I let out a bitter laugh. By betraying me? I was desperate, James, she whispered. I made a mistake. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. But I was wrong. He's smarter than I gave him credit for. He's been playing both of us. I paced the room, trying to process everything. The betrayal. The lies. The danger I hadn't seen coming. Then something clicked. The business retreat, I said. That's when he's planning to make his move, isn't it? Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face. He's going to expose you, James. He has documents, recordings, everything he needs to ruin you. I clenched my fists. Not if I stop him first. Caroline stood, panic in her eyes. You can't confront him. He's dangerous, James. You don't know what he's capable of. I grabbed my coat, my jaw set. No, I said. But he doesn't know what I'm capable of either. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving Caroline behind. This time, I wasn't just looking for answers. I was going to finish what I started 6 years ago. And this time, Daniel wasn't walking away. The air outside the lodge was icy, biting against my skin as I marched toward my car. Caroline's revelation echoed in my head, twisting my memories into something darker. 6 years ago, I had killed Rainier Capital with a single report. It wasn't personal, it was business. A company on the brink of collapse, riddled with shady practices and reckless decisions. I'd done what I was hired to do, I cut the cord before the whole thing came crashing down. But I hadn't looked too closely at the fallout. I hadn't seen the faces of the investors who lost everything. One of them had been Daniel Spencer. And now he was back. I drove in silence, the headlights cutting through the winding mountain road. The retreat wasn't just a coincidence, it was a trap. I was sure of it now. Daniel had brought Caroline here for a reason. He wasn't just after money. He wanted my name, my career, my legacy. He wanted to watch me burn. I couldn't let that happen. By the time I parked near the lodge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the hills. The lights inside the building glowed warmly, but there was nothing comforting about this place anymore. I made my way around the side of the lodge, keeping to the shadows. I knew Daniel would be preparing something, his final move, the crescendo to the twisted game he'd been playing. But I wasn't going to let him make the first move. Not this time. I spotted him near the back entrance, standing alone with his phone pressed to his ear. He was pacing, his breath visible in the cold air. I moved closer, keeping quiet. "Everything's set," Daniel was saying. "The documents will be leaked tomorrow morning. By the time he realizes what's happened, it'll be too late." My pulse quickened. "I'll send the files tonight," Daniel continued. "Yeah. No, she doesn't know. She still thinks she can keep him safe." I clenched my fists. "Let him have one last night of peace," Daniel said with a dry laugh. "Because after this, his world falls apart." I stepped out of the shadows. "You sure about that?" Daniel froze mid-step. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw me. For a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made my skin crawl. "James Hood," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You've been waiting for me?" "Of course." He spread his arms as if welcoming an old friend. "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." I took a step closer, keeping my gaze locked on his. "Cut the theatrics. What do you want?" Daniel chuckled. "Oh, it's not about what I want. It's about what you took from me." I frowned. "Rainier Capital?" "Rainier," he repeated, his voice cold. "You think it was just a failed investment? You think I was just another angry shareholder?" I said nothing, letting him speak. "You destroyed more than a company, James. You destroyed lives." "My life." His eyes darkened, the mask of charm slipping to reveal the fury beneath. "Do you know how long it took me to rebuild after that? How many people I had to pay off? How much I lost because of you?" I didn't flinch. I did my job. The company was a house of cards. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "Do you even remember the people you ruined? The names on that list?" I stared at him, unblinking. "No." His lips curled into a bitter smile. "Exactly. You never bothered to look. But one of those names should have stood out." I felt a chill run down my spine. "My brother," Daniel said. "Ryan Spencer. He was Rainier's CFO." The name hit me like a freight train. I remembered Ryan, vaguely. He'd been the one signing off on the fraudulent numbers, the one who tried to spin the disaster into something salvageable. He was the face of Rainier's collapse. "What happened to him?" I asked. Daniel's smile faded. "He killed himself." The world tilted beneath me. He lost everything, his career, his reputation, his family. And when he couldn't see a way out, he took the only way he could. Daniel's voice cracked, but his fury held steady. "Because of you." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. "I told myself I'd make you pay," Daniel continued. "I've spent years waiting for the right moment. I was patient. I watched you. I learned everything about you, your career, your habits, your marriage." His eyes gleamed with a sinister satisfaction. "And when I saw an opening, I took it." "Caroline," I said, the pieces clicking into place. Daniel nodded. "She was the perfect way in. She thought she was keeping you safe. But all she did was bring me closer." I clenched my fists. "You used her." "I did," Daniel said unapologetically. "Just like you used my brother as a scapegoat." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" We stood in silence, the weight of the past pressing down on both of us. Finally, Daniel stepped back, pulling his phone out again. "It doesn't matter. The damage is done. Tomorrow morning, everyone will know who you really are." I took another step toward him. "And you think that's justice?" "It's my justice," Daniel said. I shook my head. "No. It's revenge. Call it what you want." Daniel turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Not so fast," I growled. "You think you're done with me? Think again." He smirked. "What are you going to do, James? Fight me? Ruin me? You've already done that once." "No," I said quietly. "This time, I'm going to make sure you never get back up." Daniel shook off my grip and stepped back, his smirk unwavering. The confidence in his eyes was maddening. He thought he'd already won. "Go home, James," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Spend your last night of peace with your wife. Enjoy it while you can." I didn't move. "What's your plan, Daniel?" I asked. "Destroy me and then what? You think that'll bring your brother back?" His face darkened. "This isn't about bringing Ryan back. It's about making you feel what he felt, helpless, ruined, watching everything you've built crumble around you. You think I haven't already felt that?" I took a step closer. "You think learning that my wife betrayed me wasn't enough? That watching my family fall apart wasn't enough? You're late to the party, Daniel. The damage is already done." For the first time, his confidence wavered. "You've been playing a game with a man who has nothing left to lose," I said, my voice steady. "And that makes me more dangerous than you." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're dangerous? You're just a man with a failed marriage and a crumbling reputation." "No," I said. "I'm the man who sees through your lies." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up so he could see the screen. It was recording. His smirk vanished. "You've been talking a lot tonight, Daniel. You've admitted to blackmail, fraud, and harassment. It's all here." I shook the phone for emphasis. "Everything you've done to me, to Caroline. It's all going to the police." He lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. "Don't bother," I said. "The recording's already backed up. The moment I leave here, it's going to my lawyer and the authorities." Daniel's composure cracked. His face twisted with fury, the mask of charm completely gone. "You think they'll believe you?" he snarled. "After everything I've got on you?" I stared him down. "We'll see who they believe, an honest consultant with a spotless record, or a disgraced investor with a history of failed ventures." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might swing at me, but instead, he stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. "You don't get it, do you?" he said. "You ruined my life, James. I've been planning this for years. And that's the difference between us," I said quietly. "You've been living in the past. I'm moving forward." I turned and started walking back toward the lodge. "You'll regret this," Daniel shouted after me. I stopped and glanced over my shoulder. "No, Daniel. You will." The next morning, I left Breckenridge Lodge and drove straight to my lawyer's office. By the end of the day, Daniel Spencer's name was flagged in multiple investigations: fraud, blackmail, embezzlement. It didn't take long for the authorities to catch up with him. The documents he planned to leak, they never saw the light of day. Instead, the headlines were about him. Caroline left a week later. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy. She sipped her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied. She looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never wanted it to end like this." "Neither did I." She nodded, standing slowly. "I'll be staying with my sister for a while." I didn't stop her. There was nothing left to say. Months passed. The world moved on. Daniel Spencer's downfall became a cautionary tale in the business world, a man consumed by revenge, undone by his own obsession. As for me, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy. The wounds ran deep, but I found strength in starting over. I left consulting behind and focused on teaching, mentoring young professionals who wanted to build businesses with integrity. One day, as I was locking up my classroom, I received a message from Aiden. "Aiden, dinner tonight?" I smiled, typing back a quick reply. Me, wouldn't miss it. The past was behind me now, a chapter closed. And the future? That was mine to write.